While we wait for people to join, and we probably have a lot of people joining, why don't we open it up a little bit? Let people get to know us just before the panel really starts. Um, Jeff, one of the things I'm super curious to hear about you and the other panelists is, when you were a kid, what did you dream about becoming, and how did that kind of shape over time?
I think most people will be shocked by this. I actually thought I'd be a stand-up comedian growing up. Watched a lot of Eddie Murphy and growing up in the 80s. So I always thought it'd be awesome to be a stand-up comedian.
Were you funny?
No, not at all. That's why I had to pivot to revenue operations.
A very serious trade.
It can be comical. It can be comical at times.
Can be. I think we'll talk about some of the ways that sales leaders are just funny when it comes to RevOps. But Nancy, how about you? Same question.
I wanted to be a rock star, but unfortunately, I'm not a good singer. So I don't know why I had that as a dream. I guess I just enjoyed it. But to Jeff's comment about being a comic, I took a improv class once, and I thought, I'm funny. I think I could do well in this improv class. And I did horribly because it's so much harder than I thought it would be. Because you have to just let your mind go and you can't think too hard about it, which is hard for me to do. So I can relate to what you said, Jeff.
About your ambitions of rock stardom, did you actually play any instruments, any rock instruments?
Oh, no, I didn't. I played the piano a little bit, enough for me to enjoy listening to myself, but not for anyone else to want to hear it.
I feel you. That was me too.
When the people go on American Idol and you think, well, why would they think they were good enough to do that? I always go, oh, I know.
Deanna, how about you?
Yeah, so growing up, and some folks do know this about me, I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to take the world by storm. And I actually recorded quite a few albums, and
oh wow,
yeah, I got to do some fun stuff, right? Got to be on TBN and BET and the jazz festivals. It was kind of fun. I still do it. I still do it for me now. It is a form of creative expression, which led me to marketing. So it all works together.
You got some people
awesome.
requesting the recordings, Deanna, and I'll join them as well.
If
Maybe
you
you can
Google
play it on
me-
the outro.
Yeah. If they Google me, I will pop up in Spotify. It's kind of funny.
Oh wow, it's incredible.
Well, I know what I'm doing later. I'm
Oh.
definitely checking that out.
Matt, you're back. Tell us. So what were your ambitions when you were a young kid?
No different than everyone here. I guess I thought I was going to be in entertainment as well, because I thought I was going to play linebacker for the New York Giants, even though I wasn't even allowed to play linebacker at my local Pee Wee team. I just was like, you know what, they're just missing out. Like, they'll get it right and they'll put me there, and then one thing's going to lead to another, and that's where I'll be. Took a slightly different path though.
Wow. We've got a lot of creatives here. I guess I'm the odd one out. I thought I was going to be a lawyer because I had a lot of kind of negotiating that I was doing as a kid, like very well-reasoned arguments as to why I should be able to stay up late and why, I should be able to kind of reframe the rules of the household. So took a bit more of a creative turn as I progressed.
I love it. It's always so much fun to get these insights about our panelists. So thank you all for sharing. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third and sadly final day of our 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit, Race to 22. These 3 days would not have been possible without the work of our amazing sponsors. Thank you to the teams at Atrium, Spiff, Vidyard, SalesLoft, Chorus, Verison Concert, DemoStack, Ring DNA, and Sendoso. We appreciate you all and all that you do. Now, you probably know the spiel by heart now, but today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission here at MSP is to create an environment for our 20K and growing members so they can answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own, as well as see around corners. We do that through great live sessions like what you've been experiencing this week at the summit, through our very robust online forum, and hopefully in the near future, our in-person events. Those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. But if you don't, please don't hesitate to drop us a note at modernsaleshq.com. We are always happy to help. Our final day is going to be action-packed. We are starting off with our panel, Out with the Old, In with the New, RevOps Redux. At 11 a.m., we will then have our very exciting AMA, or Ask Me Anything, on sales motions and mimosas with Pete Kazanji. Seriously, you can ask him anything. And finally, we'll close out the summit at 1 p.m. with a look into Vidyard's highly successful sales playbook. Now, for this morning's panel, which we are very excited for, we'll first go over some housekeeping and then some speaker introductions so you can meet our great panelists. From there, we'll go on to the discussion prompts, which are: what initiative should your tech stack measure? How do you take stock of your existing stack? And how are you thinking about tech for 2022? We'll round it out with a live Q&A, so don't be shy, ask your questions. And then we'll end with key takeaways from our panelists. Now, before we dive into this first session and introduce our moderator for today, we do have some housekeeping notes. First, yes, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function. We really worry about missing them when they're sent through the chat. So Q&A is the way to go. We want you to send as many questions as you can think of, and we'll be sure to get to them during the event. But now, enough from me. I am beyond thrilled to introduce RevOps enthusiast, the fabulous Natalie Peled-David, who will be our moderator for today's event. Take it away, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm so excited to be here. I'll introduce myself briefly, and then I want to make sure you get to know our incredible panel that's here with us today. So I've been in sales and leading revenue teams for the past 10 years for US and Israeli-based tech companies. My focus has been, of course, on hitting and exceeding revenue targets, but in order to get there, working cross-functionally to operationalize growth and make it easy for people to do their best work. As Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a RevOps enthusiast, and I can't wait to hear what our panelists share with us today. So Jeff, Deanna, Matt, and Nancy, in that order, can you tell us a little bit about why you're interested in the topic today, and what are some of the experiences that you bring to the discussion?
I think I was the first name. So
you got it, Jeff.
Name is Jeff Ignacio, currently host the Revenue Architect podcast. Day job is a sales ops lead covering at Amazon AWS. I started my career in technology consulting at Accenture, working for the media entertainment studios, configuring SAP. Worked in sales for a number of years before moving to helping scale businesses through FP&A at Intel and Google. And then the last 6-7 years, I've been at startups on that $10 to $100 million journey, building and leading revenue operations teams.
Great. We're so excited to have you. Deanna. Oh, you're on mute.
I said, thank you, Natalie. Sorry about that. Someone had to do it. Someone had to be on mute, so it's me. Deanna Ransom, Global Head of Marketing. I actually started off my career carrying a sales bag, selling ERP software solutions, and then made it a point in a very selfish act to try to get more warm leads. And I spent time with marketing and wanting to figure out how to do that. And so I made that transition, spending time at information builders, many years at SAP, and then began leading marketing teams and progressing to be able to lead revenue growth organizations. And in that pursuit, of course, you want to make sure that you are able to align both the technology and the people so that you can achieve the growth outcomes that you're looking for. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Dan. And we're going to want to hear a lot more about kind of these kind of crossovers between how you bring the people and the tech together, because that's really what it's all about. Matt Bigelow.
Hey, it's really exciting to be here with these esteemed folks. Probably don't have the same credentials, but I do have spent a lot of time in selling. I've been leading sales teams or acting as an individual contributor for the last 13, 14 years, working in the tech space. My very first sales job, which you won't catch on my LinkedIn because I wasn't too proud of it, was just driving around with my one hubcap car, selling door to door to mom and pop shops for local marketing and advertising platforms. And what I learned through that experience is that it's really nice to work in an office. So no matter how hard a sales job could possibly be, I always think myself, I'm not alone in my car with my thoughts after getting rejected. So why I'm excited about this topic is A, being in an office and selling is wonderful. And B, being able to have tools to help you do that, even better.
Wow, that definitely helped you build some muscle, I'm sure, as a starting point. Nancy.
Good morning. Thanks for having me participate today. My background is in sales. My first job was as a sales rep in Silicon Valley in the early 80s, selling the world's first laptop computer. And we were across from another startup called Sun Micro. So we're kind of going back in time. I always sold to large enterprise accounts like Microsoft and HP, et cetera. But what we were selling, as I said, was the first laptop computer. And it was at a time when not everyone even had a desktop. So we zeroed in on field sales and field engineers and had to come up with apps to make them be interested in using and spending $10,000 on a laptop. And I believe that that's really when CRM came into being. And also things like a digital slideshow, the concept of not having to bring actual slides with you. So I've been involved in technology as well for a long time. And 12 years or so ago, I started Smart Selling Tools. And some of you may be familiar with this map or landscape in the background here. That's my landscape. And I've categorized all of the sales technologies that are out there into 43 different categories. So I've been eating, living, and breathing sales tech for the last 12 years full time.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So if you've been tuning into some of these other MSP sessions as part of the Race to 22 Summit, we're really here to support you, go-to-market leaders, and setting yourselves up for success in 2022. There's been talk of go-to-market strategy, goal design, headcount, territory, and compensation planning, and we're here to bring it all together with the final piece of the puzzle, which is technology and tools. And so I want to kind of kick off the first piece of the discussion, but before I do that, if we can put up our first poll. Our goal is to give our listeners some very actionable advice on best practices across these topics. And to make sure that we hit the right notes here, I want to do kind of a quick poll to understand who's joined us in the audience today. What's your role in the organization? So if you can answer that poll that you've got up on the screen, we'll make sure to keep our answers really, really relevant, really actionable for you in your role. And while we're kind of wrapping up that poll, I want to kick off the first discussion topic. The first question that we wanted to discuss as a panel today was really, what initiatives should your tech stack measure? And I know that's a broad question and maybe intentionally so, but Nancy, I wonder if you could tell us, how would you answer that one?
Yeah, I would say that the question is almost backwards, because I think people or organizations should start out with, what is it that you want to measure? And then you should build your tech stack accordingly. But lots of organizations already have tech. And so they might want to say, in hindsight, well, now that we have this particular kinds of tech already installed, what do we want to measure? And then, of course, I get to your first bullet. It depends, right, on what tech you already have. And let's see, I mean, I think the best things to measure are, again, it depends on what your title is, because if you're RevOps versus a sales rep versus a manager or marketing ops person, then you're going to want to measure different things. I think one of the best things to measure is how much of your time is actually spent selling. And that's a hard one. And you can't really get that from technology. So I would say that's something that an organization should really think about.
I think that's a great answer. And, certainly it was a bit of a trap question there, but glad you didn't fall into the trap. It depends. Ding, ding, ding is probably the answer that we need to hear. But that being said, Deanna, can you help us understand? So how do you even begin to approach it?
Well, again, I think if you want to look at, do I already have a tech stack in place versus you're trying to put something in place, it looks a little different, right? If you have a tech stack in place, you want to be able to do an audit. What do you already have? What technologies do you have in place? Where are they sitting across your revenue organization? What are the ones that are being used? How are they being used? Are we using them to their fullest extent, right? What capabilities you have. So I recommend an audit, right? If you have a tech stack in place and you can optimize, and you need to do an audit across finance, right? As well, because they have the contracts. So you understand, what's about to expire, and really understand also with your IT department, right? What they view as potentially problematic from a security perspective. I think a lot of times we forget how technology actually is not just the enablement piece, that there's a security measure that we're also responsible for. If you're looking at new technology, my recommendation is to not just go get a point solution within a department, if at all possible, but to have those conversations, right, across your organization. This is how you align the people and the technology, right? Because now we're having conversations to say, oh, I think I'm going to go get, I don't want to name any technology names. I'm going to go get this other CRM because it's the newest, latest, greatest, right? But the company already has a CRM that isn't being fully utilized. We need to weigh the pros and cons across the organization and even look at the skill sets that are in place, right? To be able to utilize the technology. Is there more knowledge around one particular piece of tech versus going and getting another new piece of tech where you're going to have to upskill the team and maybe get in new people? So to me, I think it really starts with being clear, having conversation, potentially doing an audit, right? Or having conversation about what to bring in.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a point that we're definitely going to be expanding on a lot, because I think we kept coming back to that, right? Like even when we were initially discussing this topic, there was this sense of, okay, it really depends on, are you starting with a blank slate and you're just kind of deciding what pieces of the puzzle to put in place, or are you evaluating or optimizing some existing state that you're trying to improve? And do you do that through shaving off tech or adding tech or adjusting the tech that you have? I think before we go down that path, Jeff, I wanted to hear, your take. You kind of boiled it down to three main types of objectives that your tech stack should be able to help you accomplish. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk about technology within the business environment, it's really to enable capabilities from which you can then measure the impact from it. And I break it down into three core objectives. One is speed, the second is reach, and the three is information symmetry. If you think about it, these tools are meant to accomplish a couple of things: labor savings, carving time back. We usually use the mantra, let the sellers sell, let the marketers market. And so the labor savings is an exercise in speed, and it thus allows for reallocation of time, shifting from the tactical to the strategic, from the low prioritization items to your high priority items. Second, the second is for RevOps pros, they know this. Oftentimes we can be bogged down in the tactical, and we want to move over to the strategic so that we can elevate ourselves to become partners at the table. In terms of reach, technology, today, you can mine petabytes, gigabytes of data, terabytes of data than ever before, allowing marketers to create targeted pocket campaigns and allow parallel campaigns, in larger numbers than ever before. And lastly, information asymmetry. This goes both ways. Buyers now have access to price. SaaS companies know this. They publish their price for the most part, unless it's an enterprise deal. But that's created a ton of pressure on sellers to make sure that we up our game in order to meet the buyers where they are. Now that the fact that they have more information, they move further down the buying cycle. Likewise, when it comes to intent data for marketers, there's almost this creepy peeping Tom advantage that sellers now have, that they can understand if you're no longer just problem aware, you're solution aware, and you're starting to evaluate options. So those three things in conjunction, I think, are some of the powerful pillars that technology enables.
Perfect. So if I kind of can recap that, it's really also about understanding or categorizing what are these initiatives that you're trying to accomplish and putting them into those buckets of, which of those three. Is it really about solving for speed, reach, or information asymmetry that might exist currently in the organization, and then deriving from there how you go about kind of setting up your tech? Is that right?
That's exactly it.
Perfect. Before we kind of continue here, I just wanted to share the results of the poll. I don't know if that was already published, but I think useful to know, there we go, that we've got a majority of RevOps folks. So that makes a lot of sense. I think no surprise there, but we've also got a lot of executive sales leadership. And I think that's fantastic. A lot of what we'll be talking about is how do we support the right dialogue between kind of the tech and the business objectives, and that marriage between executive sales leadership and RevOps is obviously a critical one. So, Matt, help us understand why is it not such a seamless activity for executive sales leaders and for RevOps to just kind of manage this tech stack and go about, just deciding, okay, we need another new piece of tech to measure this new thing. Where do people go wrong? What are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing, and what are some of the ideas that you have about how to do it much better?
Yeah, I don't claim to know it all, but I have the privilege of speaking with G2Ks every day, as well as some of the fastest growing startups. It's a really unique role that I get to have. I get to talk to a lot of people who are all using technology in different ways. The first thing that I think that we need to measure with our tech stack is it actually doing the thing that we bought it for very well for us? Every SaaS company that you have a subscription to is giving value to someone else, or they're well on their way to being bankrupt anyway. So it's a safe assumption that if people use the technology well, it's a valuable solution, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily valuable for you and your org and the culture of how you sell or your process. So the first thing that I would measure, well, I think most people would start with pipe velocity. They might measure close rates. They might measure the ability to generate pipeline, things of that nature. And I think those could be a fool's errand, so to speak, and make you think there's some false positives that aren't really there. So I tend to oversimplify things. And I think you might just want to sit down and literally write down every piece of subscription tech that you have. If it's not on subscription, who cares? You paid for it once. But if it's subscription tech, write every single one down, get the right people in the room, the right revenue leaders, the right RevOps folks, info systems, and just ask very point blank, what was the purpose of this particular subscription? Why did we buy it? Narrow it down to one thing. So let's say the example was forecasting software. We could say, okay, well, the board and investors were getting mad at us about having sloppy forecasting. So we thought this tool would help us forecast better. It also has like an AI component that can kind of help us figure out where we're going to be. Okay, then you ask yourself a very simple question in that room. Is it doing this well for us? Yes or no? No kindas. So if it's a kinda or a no, get out of that arrangement and push that to the side, right? And then if it is a yes, then just figure out one quantifiable metric to attribute to that. Because if you take all this standard stuff, ASP, close rate, whatever, and just generally shotgun that across your entire tech stack, you're going to think that all of it's good and you can't get rid of any of it. And the inevitable outcome is analysis paralysis for reps who have too much technology in their life and they're not doing what Jeff was talking about, which is being on the phone selling or being live in person selling. So once it's a yes, just come up with one key indicator. So if it was the forecasting software, let's say it's the percent of deviation 6 weeks out from the end of the quarter to where we actually landed. And maybe you decide anything greater than 10% would mean this thing isn't even working for us. So you just look at that and see, is it working? That's the first thing I would suggest measuring is, does it work for you? And then you could move into more traditional sales metrics that you want to measure. But first, figure out if you should even have that thing. Because what I see from G2Ks and startups is that people have too much at their disposal and there's a lot of waste.
So kind of the less is more approach here, but also really making sure that what you've got is really serving the purpose that it's intending to serve. I guess kind of a good transition, and thanks so much for that, Matt, a good transition to this next topic. You know, a lot of you have talked about needing to take stock and needing to do that audit, needing to assess what do you currently have and how well is it serving you and your organizational objectives. I want to kind of get back to you, Deanna, and also thinking about what Matt just said. How can you ensure that you're doing this tech audit effectively? And especially when, you've talked a lot about bringing members across the organization into the room to have that conversation. Do you think it's possible to land on one singular definition of what the tech should be doing, especially when you've got, for example, marketing and sales and finance in the room all together?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great question. And one of the things that I always do as part of the working motion is to sit down and have clearly defined definitions for us as an organization. It's like having a language that everyone can speak, right? When you clearly define, this is what we're all rallying around in terms of, I'll give you an example that everyone can relate to in CRM, right? So you hear folks talk about, a contact versus a lead versus a AQL, a TQL, an MQL, an SQL, and all the QLs, right? That all the way through to an opportunity and such. What I have found is that just aligning, if you think about technology, before you get to technology, aligning your people around the language and the definition can be hugely impactful, right? And then aligning around, okay, now that we have a common language and we're looking at our tech stack, and I recommend that you do a documented audit as opposed to an audit where you're just talking it out, because you want to sit down and look at, and again, I'll go back to, it's a revenue organization, right? So we have to work together as one system, right, to be able to accomplish our goal. So look at what are the tools that are being used within marketing, sales, customer success. What other parts of the organization are impacted, or other systems that maybe don't sit directly within your revenue organization? What other systems are flowing information into some of these things? Of course, for example, financials sometimes need to flow into the CRM so that you can understand lead to cash, right? So you need to understand what is touching what. You need to document it across and see what lives in what piece of the organization, and then map that out, much like Nancy has done with all of those platforms that you see behind her. You need to have a definition, right? A common language. You need to have a tech stack map with which then has, the capabilities, or at least the known capabilities. And then I recommend you do a gap analysis, right? Just like we do in our real roles. You want to do a gap analysis within your technology as part of the audit, and then be able to say, okay, now let's start taking, real actions to say, what are the ones that have high adoption? Which ones are sitting in silos that no one's really using, right? These are the kinds of things that make a huge difference before you start pulling the trigger. So I recommend that documented, cross-departmental audit, which includes all of your business partners, right? What are some of the ones that, and I want to throw this out here because I had this as an experience. What are some of the technologies that maybe an individual piece of a department brought in that secretly your IT team finds problematic? Right? They see it as a security risk. We have to be good partners, right, throughout the business in order to accomplish the goals. So make sure that we're having that piece of the conversation as well. What are the ones that maybe if it doesn't have a SOC 2 compliance, your IT team really wants you to get rid of it, right? Do we have wide adoption? Is there another tool that maybe we should bring in? Or, do we just need to reevaluate and really make sure that we as a company know why a technology should stay? So it needs to be thorough. I recommend that because once you build that as a framework, right, you really have a powerful technology platform to grow your business on.
Yeah. I want to even go like one level deeper and like make it super, super practical, because I think probably people who are listening today are saying like, yeah, we need that. But you know, someone somewhere should do that, right? Isn't someone taking care of that? Nancy, can you help us get like really, really actionable here at its most basic? Like, what can this audit look like? In what form? On what tool do you use to like map it all out?
Mhm. Yeah, and before I answer that, I'll just say that, look, if everyone that's listening today just did what Deanna just said you should do, you would be miles ahead of all of your competitors. So that alone is probably, worth the time of the webinar today. I would say to actually get the audit completed, one question you had was who should do it, or isn't someone doing it? That's part of the problem, is that there isn't any one person in charge of sales tech or MarTech or together RevTech. It's not like it's an IT, something that IT oversees, although they're somewhat involved. So you've got to figure out who's going to take ownership of it. And it can be just as simple as setting up a survey and sending it out to all the people all the constituents that make sense. So send out a survey. What are you using? You can ask specific questions for this or for that, or just what are all the different tools that are in your tech stack that you have purchased, because you got to be careful how you word it. It's not necessarily that you're using, because you may not really be getting much use out of it. So what tech stack have you purchased? What did you purchase it for? What did you expect to get from it? Are you getting that from it? When does it expire? Just think of all the things that you need to learn about it. And then when you get the results back, take a look at where those solutions fit on this map, because if you have 3 or 4 solutions that fit in the same category, then you might have some insight as to where you can get some cost savings, and even tech, higher tech usage, consolidation, so that you don't have as many tools and you have fewer that are working harder for you. I think it could be as simple as just setting up a survey. I did want to just comment on something that Matt has said. And Matt, I totally agree with everything you said, except I might have a slight different view on the question, are you getting the value from it that you wanted to get? And if the answer is no, kind of move on. Because a lot of time what happens for SaaS solutions is we think, oh, that looks exactly like what we need. All we have to do is, buy a license or buy 50 licenses for it, and then we're good to go. And many organizations just aren't ready for that yet. They don't have the commitment to train, to help people understand how to use it, to follow up on adoption. And so the answer to, are you getting value for it, may just be, you might want to ask one more question. Why? Is it because we didn't commit enough resources or management expectation that we're going to follow through? Or is it because we did everything we could be doing and it just isn't working for us?
Matt, feel free to respond on that, because I know you've also mentioned that even with the why, maybe it doesn't matter all that much. Like, it's probably useful to understand, but feel free to respond here.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a very interesting point. I think the why, 99% of the time, it is adoption. And I think there are some mission critical things that, and I believe it's kind of ties into the question that's on the screen here, actually. Like, there are mission critical things that you should focus on driving the adoption with. But frankly, you're probably never going to be able to drive adoption across a really large portfolio. So I think, like, oftentimes we can get bogged down in saying to ourselves, well, I mean, it could do this, and that might be on us, or maybe the info systems rollout wasn't good, or we should have held a couple more webinars, or let's just talk to our CSM. But that brings me back to my initial point. It doesn't mean the technology is bad. Other people are getting value out of that technology because they have adopted it. You particularly haven't. If it's mission critical, if it's a CRM, like, that's literally like the modern day Rolodex, like, you have to keep track of your customers, consider working through that. But there are so many ancillary things that stack onto the CRM effectively that we have bought. And in my experience with most groups, you want to just get rid of the ones, like, very easily, very simply, where you can say, does it meet its purpose? What was the purpose? Yes, no. If no, get rid of it, because that will actually free you up for a pretty daunting project in and of itself, which is an adoption project across the 10 or 15 that are probably still remaining. And I think that's kind of like why I would recommend that to folks, because you could find a good reason to keep everything, and you'll always be able to blame yourself for why it's not working out. I see too many organizations do that and then try to make them all work. I would say, like, let's get the couple that really do work, right? You know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of dieting techniques and all that kind of stuff. But if you eat healthy food, and you do some light exercise, and you don't eat after like 7 p.m., like, you're probably going to be fine. And I think that we've overcomplicated business in many ways. And I just would like to challenge everyone who listens to think about it slightly differently and say, it's actually pretty simple. Like, does it work? If not, let's get rid of it. And let's just focus on some core stuff. And when you focus on core stuff, people can move quickly. Jeff talked about speed. Speed is excellent, right? And we are in an activity business, and oftentimes too much of the sales tech and the MarTech that we have serves management, but not IC speed. And they're in the activity business. So I think less for them could be more, to Nancy's point, every situation needs to be taken with a grain of salt, and every situation is dynamic.
Jeff, I'm curious to hear, I mean, this is just a little bit specific here, but in your experience, have you seen companies, you know, let's say initial adoption was not stellar. Have you seen companies successfully like run re-adoption programs or re-engagement programs around tech that previously like wasn't considered a success?
I'd say that when it comes to adoption and enablement, you can do so when you're turning new versions over. So this is not necessarily a turnaround situation, but many organizations have migrated from Salesforce Classic to Salesforce Lightning. And that's a pretty daunting and major lift for organizations of all sizes, particularly because people have been working with the Classic interface for so long. But for low adoption tools, let's say, for example, I have seen and personally implemented or re-implemented training for some capabilities. So for example, a predecessor that I walked into was on their way out, and they just brought in a new tool. And so the enablement and training and rollout of that initial instance was half-baked, not because of the individual, but just because of the timing and the tenure and the natural churn of an organization. So when I came in with my team, we had to go and basically resell, you know, not to the leadership team. The leadership team fundamentally was on board because they had already, you know, essentially greenlit the execution of this tool. But essentially we needed to drive adoption and usage because it was a capability that was deemed useful in the organization, and that they did not want to manually perform these activities no longer. And that's why they brought that tool in. So we had to come in and do that situation. And it's going to be, I would say it comes down to commitment on both sides from the field and from your support tool organization. If it's RevOps, sales ops, or IT, whatever it may be, you just want to make sure that you're getting maximum value. And there's obviously going to be situations where you have a turnaround like that.
Thanks. And so to kind of wrap up this part of the conversation, we heard some really good advice here about how to run this audit in your organization, how to run a gap analysis essentially between the tools that you have and the value that you're getting out of those tools. And then once you identify some areas of weakness or areas of underperformance, right, we're hearing some really useful discussions around, well, how do you get rid of some of it? How do you understand the root causes of why you ultimately didn't get the value that you needed? And in some cases, you might even consider kind of re-adoption programs, but not in every case and not at all costs. So I want to help us move into kind of our final discussion topic, which is really thinking ahead, planning for 2022, and how does that tech come into play? Jeff, back to you for a second. Really, really practically, how should we be planning for 2022 when it comes to decisions about tools and budgeting?
So for those who are in fiscal or those on a January timer for their January and for their fiscal, if you're not already planning, I can say you might be in a world of hurt for 2022. That's at all levels for operational expenditures, headcount, and programmatics. But you know, I would say let's go ahead and get started. Start listing out what capabilities are within the business and which ones are not and desirable to add, incorporate into 2022. For the capabilities that are in place, ask yourself how effective those capabilities are enabled. Then from there, I typically would square up, asking the business for a budget essentially. And a lot of this is either going to be a spend shift, use it or lose it, or hopefully an incremental percentage tied to growth revenue. That's how I'm going to typically create a wallet or an envelope for the revenue operations organization. Once you've squared up your budget, you then need to carve up, where else you could potentially get it. Seriously consider what needs to go. Some tools can be deprecated, sunset, just because they've been ineffective at enabling those capabilities for the organization. I can't tell you, how many businesses today are literally wasting precious capital on accounts or tools just because the admin has left or they're not tracking key dates and renewals have lapsed. These key admins or these missing tools, they've long since been abandoned. So there's opportunity to scrounge a couple of pennies from underneath the cushions, but get started, start early, and make sure you line up your budget for the following year.
Thanks so much. Nancy, assuming that, some of these leaders have done the analysis and they have identified the need for some new tools, and they've identified some new initiatives, really. So starting from the goal, the objective that they want to accomplish, and then identified that, okay, we got to go and start searching for some additional tools to solve this problem. Can you offer some advice really about how and where to research the right tools and what that process could look like in order to be effective?
Yeah, I think the best way to go about it is to wait to think about the tech until you answer a couple questions, which are, how are you going to significantly accelerate growth in the next year? And how will you use technology to do that? And to answer that question, it's how can you increase the amount of time your sellers are spending selling? How can you increase the amount of time your managers are actually coaching to upskill and uplevel the reps? That's sales coaching and deal coaching. And how much improvement are you seeing in the customer engagement or customer experience? Because if you can move the needle on 3 of those, and it's hard to do it without technology. So you want to move the needle on those and figure out what's the right technology for us to do that.
Perfect. Deanna, can you maybe share something about how you actually evaluate new tech? So again, if you've identified something that you want to solve, and let's say to Nancy's point, you've identified like where you want to move the needle, there's a specific metric and you've heard that there's tech that can help you do it. What are some effective ways or some good best practices to follow when choosing a new piece of tech to put into your tech stack?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I want to bring out here that could be highly controversial is the first question I would ask myself is, okay, we've identified this new initiative or goal, and we think technology can help us. But one of the things that I would recommend that organizations start to think about is looking at your people as a core part of your tech stack, right? Because your people have to be able to utilize the tech in order to get the outcome that you're looking for the tech to produce on the other side. So again, the technology isn't the answer. It is the marriage of the people and the technology and the process that you're using, right, to adopt the technology that's going to make it successful. So number one, start thinking of your people as one of the most core value assets that you have at your disposal when you're thinking about the technology. So that would be number one. Number two would be, talk to your people as you're about to go to make the purchase of the technology to see there could be skill sets that are underutilized that could help, really ramp and accelerate the utilization of the technology, increasing the adoption, right? Because now you have people bought in. And when people are bought in, it's just easier. It lifts adoption. So I would recommend you go that route, thinking about your people, and then give your technology a goal, right? We are buying, and I'll use a very basic example. I talked about doing an audit of the technology. and mapping it out and being able to look at it. And one of the things that becomes super helpful is to be able to use a mix of visual components and the ability to easily move things around so that when you're putting your framework together, you can see them. So a tool like Smartsheet, right? We purchased that tool in one of the organizations so that we could, do all of those things. But it was after we talked about it and went and had some other conversations to say, what do we want to get out of this? Our goal was we want this technology to work for us, and we want to be able to have it do, these 5 things. Oh my gosh. And folks were like, it's kind of like Excel, but more fun. Right. And I'm not knocking or pushing any particular product. I want to be careful there. Right. But for us, we gave our technology a goal, but we also talked with our teams. And then we built into that, hey, let's make sure that we share our experience across other departments, because perhaps they may want to take advantage. And instead of having one piece of a department using Microsoft X or another piece of the department using, something else over here, and we're over here using this, how do we become, and how does our technology enable us to work better together to accomplish more? So to me, think of your people as part of your stack, and then make sure that you are aligning and giving your technology a goal. What is it supposed to do for you, and who are the people that are going to use that technology to get it done?
I have this this funny thought that after listening to the panel, people might never buy another piece of tech again because they're so daunted by needing to bring together committees and run an evaluation. Do we really need this? And have we defined it well? So hopefully that's not the takeaway, right? But the takeaway is being really thoughtful and recognizing that the tool isn't going to solve the thing necessarily, but an effective thought process, a really thorough kind of implementation plan, really well-defined goals, plus buying the right tool. Those are the things that are going to make it work. I guess, Matt, actually, just before Matt, we're kind of coming into the final stretch here. And if you have any questions that you want to pop into the Q&A that we can address as a panel, please go ahead and pop those in. But while we're kind of getting some questions in, Matt, what are some of your predictions for, how people will be buying tools? Do you think we'll be buying more tools, fewer tools? And what do you think the smartest revenue leaders are going to be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the buying is not going to slow down. I believe it's Gartner that says by 2025 we'll be near $1 trillion enterprise subscription-based spend in software. If you look at your typical total economic impact reports, most software companies are trying to boast somewhere between 3 to 9x for every dollar you invest. I don't believe that the global economy is getting $9 trillion in ROI on enterprise software. But that doesn't mean it's going to slow us down in the purchasing of it, because for anything that you Google, any pain point you have, you can Google and there's a software solution for that. And you can even create your own software programs these days, code free. I play around with that on the weekends. It's super fun. Deanna hit it though. It's about making sure that the people can use the tool itself. So my father is an illustrator. So if you give him something you want him to design and give him Photoshop, you get a masterpiece. You give me Photoshop because I don't know how to master that tool, you get a stick figure, right? So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't necessarily buy more, but I do believe that we need to make sure what we have makes sense. And then what we want to do is figure out how to drive adoption of what we have, right? Because if you spent the time to train me on how to use Photoshop, I probably could draw something really cool. It's a very powerful program, but I don't know how to use that power. One of the things that I would suggest that folks really look into once they've narrowed down what is mission critical is to consider process mining or consider digital adoption. Both of these in their own way kind of give us as the consumer, as the customer, we could take the power back from the ISVs. The ISVs have product analytics on their own software, and they know how bad their adoption is, and they're trying to fix it in all their daily huddles, et cetera. Process mining and digital adoption can actually let you see the kind of analytics that people only get normally on their own proprietary products and let you see whether or not it's actually working. That's not for the sake of churning on it. If that's a mission critical app, that would be a way for you to maybe redesign the user experience. Or you think that no one knows how to do this, but in reality, you learn everyone just struggles right over here. We could probably nip that in a 30-minute stand-up meeting, right? So I think taking the power back to really understand what the ISV knows about the software, but how your org adopts it will be big. And I also believe another worthwhile endeavor, I think a lot of people are talking about demo experience products these days. I think if you're looking to scale and you have a message that you want to make sure that the sales orgs are bringing to market very consistently, demo experience products that control what the rep can or cannot do to kind of keep them on task versus nervously clicking is also interesting. So I think that's something worth considering. But for all of these tools, it's really important that we make sure that we know whether or not people can adopt them. And if they can be quite powerful, but some of them are probably too far gone.
Got it. Thanks. Nancy, help us wrap up here. How do you keep this overview of all the tools that you're evaluating or that you have? What are some kind of good ideas that you have there?
Yeah, that's a good question, because especially in a larger company, you've got lots of different people who get called on by lots of different tool vendors, and they get interested in many of them. So how do you kind of keep the reins and understand what are all the different vendors that are being evaluated and for what purposes? And so just like having a audit set up, you can have a document set up that keeps track of all of that. And one recommendation is to say to your entire, organization, look, if you're going to be evaluating a solution, that's great. We encourage you to look into that. Have the vendor fill out this quick little, survey, I guess, or questionnaire. And it doesn't have to be a lot of questions. Just what is the main purpose of your solution? Maybe it's some things about your your organization, how big of a customer are you, or how long have you been around? What's your revenue, or some things like that? What are the capabilities that you're offering? What's the value proposition? So just gather some of that information, and then that automatically populates the spreadsheet. You could have some columns that say, what was the outcome of the evaluation? What stage are we in? Who's involved in evaluating it on our side? And then at a glimpse, you can see, hey, there are 4 different organizations within our company that are all looking at this one solution, or this organization is looking at a solution that we've already tried as a company and we've already sort of ruled it out. So it's just one way to get some sort of control while still giving leeway to your leaders to do their own evaluations.
Thanks so much for that. I think that's such an important use case, right? So different teams might very well be evaluating similar tools or the same tools to accomplish different things. How can you create some more kind of synergies across the organization as well while you're thinking about this tech stack?
One thing, sorry,
yeah.
Natalie, I just kind of want to just give a little bit of advice I think is really important for when you actually are going through a procurement cycle or evaluating software. Just for anyone on the line, just say, show me, over and over and over again to the vendor. If that person works there 40 hours a week and can't show you, get them out of slide decks. If they can't show you, how are you supposed to use it? And how is your staff supposed to use it? There's a lot of fancy marketing decks out there that talk about what the product is. I want to see the product. You're expecting me to use it. If it's a service that you sell and manage for me, fine, I don't need to see it. But I want to see non-technical people. If it's going to non-technical audience, which is salespeople, I want to see non-technical salespeople at the vendor using the product live in production. And I want to see that a lot. And I would keep tally of how often someone squirms when you say, show me. And then that might be a regrettable purchase if they're not willing to show you. It's something to look out for.
What a great tip. I love that. We're just about time here. And so I want to do one final round across each of our panelists. And can you give us like the soundbite? What is the soundbite takeaway that you want our audience to take away from this session today? Jeff, how about we start with you?
So the way I think about it, about technology, I would say the key takeaway is technology isn't always the solution. It's the thinking and the critical thinking around it, around what people, process, and tools are going to be needed for the situation at hand. So don't go hog wild and just acquire technology for technology's sake. Have a game plan.
Love that. Deanna, give us your soundbite.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the success of your technology is only as good as your people who will be using it. So make sure that as you are evaluating new technologies or auditing technologies that you feel are not working to their fullest capacity, that you dig that next level deeper and ask yourself why. Right? Did we enable our people? How comfortable are our folks with the utilization of it? Did we put a champion in place, a respected champion, to be able to make sure that we could drive the right utilization and adoption and comfortability with using it? So always think of your people in conjunction with your technology.
Love that. Thank you. Nancy, how about you? What's your soundbite takeaway?
Well, I'm always thinking about it from a very practical, how can we generate more revenue and growth perspective? So my takeaway would be to say, what's keeping us from selling more? And it may have to do with how much time our reps are actually spending on administrative things that take away their time in front of customers. It may have to do with just their not being able to be as effective as possible or not understanding the messaging right, needing to be coached. Just identify what are the things that are keeping us from selling more, and then look for ways that the current technology you already have can help with those. And if there are gaps, then look for a technology that can fill those gaps.
Awesome. Thanks. And Matt, bring it on home.
Yeah, I think the takeaway I would have is too much tech can lead to a jack of all trades and a master of none. So just do that very simple task of asking yourself if it meets its purpose. If you have a kinda, maybe just push that one to the side. You still have plenty of others you could focus on. And then focus on mastering adoption of the ones that you have. Deanna pointed it out really well. These are super powerful tools. And if the reps know how to use them to the maximum capability, then there will be ROI, but you probably can't do that across everything that you have. It might be a bit of a fool's errand. So I'd say master the power of the technology and maybe just a little bit less of it. And then you'll be probably set up to close a lot more. I think the best teams and the best companies in the world have mastered doing one thing really, really, really good. And maybe you can get your reps to master 3 things really, really well, and they'll be better off than having 11 or 12 things at their disposal.
Boom. Thank you all so much. So well said, and really different kind of faceted approaches to the same topic, but I think we're hearing a lot of similar themes come up. So really well done. Thank you all so much. And I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth.
All right. Thank you so much to Natalie for moderating, and to our panelists, Jeff, Deanna, Matthew, and Nancy. It has been fantastic to have your insight on this subject. The recording and key takeaways will be made available shortly, so be on the lookout for our daily recaps of the summit with these links and more. And check out our final 2 summit offerings in the chat. So I just put that through for you. And so did Taylor. We really want you to come. Thank you again to all of our summit sponsors, and thank you to everyone out there for attending. We cannot wait to see you at our next event, our AMA with Pete Kazanji at 11 a.m. So come armed with questions. It is your chance to ask him anything, and maybe even get him in the cups. So pop your champagne and get ready. Stay safe, and see you soon.